Welcome back to Let's Take a Walk, brought to you by the Feld Group Institute. Transformation isn't new. We've lived through transformational eras before. Each one changed how business works. What matters is how companies respond in those moments. And right now, the speed, scale, and stakes are higher than ever. So to understand what transformation really requires of your organization, let's start by looking at the history of technology-driven transformations.
The term transformation should be held as a special term because it means special things and it happens at special times. So if you go back in history, you'll see the steam engine was truly transformational, right? I mean, it changed the way business was done. It changed the way people lived. And then electricity was phenomenal during the Gilded Age. It came about all of a sudden, indoor plumbing. During my lifetime and career, the mainframe computer that was announced in 1964 was transformational. All the regional businesses started centralizing and functionalizing around a centralized mainframe and got a lot of leverage in it for decades. That was incremental for about 30 years from the mid 60s to the early 90s. And then in the early 90s, the internet came about. And then within that, there was, another invention, which was mobility, which kind of was transformational in itself. But when you put the internet and mobility together, you created a world that was put the power in the hands of the customer and was global, right? So that was transformation. It was holistic. The ability to connect the world has created opportunities, but it's also created issues for companies that are not and people that are not digitally aware. So we're into this next era of transformation, which is digital. True transformations, as opposed to uh, incremental transformations, are holistic and they change everything about the business processes, the technology, the organization structures, leadership, culture, economics, and the operating models of companies. So a true transformation era like this one will require all of that to happen. And the reason that it's so hard is, one, you've got to get the entire leadership team bought into the idea that we're in the middle of a transformation. It's serious, it's not incremental, and it's going to take a sequence-paced multi-year journey. I mean, we're not going to do this by buying technology and just sticking it in, because inherent in the structure of the company are business processes, right, that need to change, organizations that need to change dramatically, and that's probably the hardest thing to change, right? And economics. You've got to invest in it. And all of those components have a legacy component to it. So there's a legacy culture, not just legacy systems, right? There's a legacy way of measuring the economics of a business, right? It's always been ROI. It's always been a business case for each project and each component. Now we're talking about capabilities and larger chunks of the way things change and the way we operate, the way we plan things, the way we invest has got to change. And all of that has to be sequenced together. So what we've done with IT in particular, with just about everything, is in each of these transformational eras that we've talked about before, we built veneers on top of it. We built websites. So if you brought in a big AI head engine that was very powerful to be able to assimilate and sort what does it mean if tariffs change? What does it mean if the Fed raises or lowers an interest rate? What does it mean if there's a strike and a disruption? The brain can sort that stuff. And in the other end of the spectrum, at the extremities, you really understand and know what's going on because you have sensors and there are devices and robots reporting back in. The problem is the digital nervous system that sits between them in many companies still has mainframe technology and it still has distributed and PC and internet and mobility and every era we've had before because we've put veneers on top of things instead of going in and changing it. But now the ability to sense from the extremities and respond from the brain has got to be cleared out with all of the years of legacy. And, that's what it means to become digital, right? That's what it means to become agile, but you can't just become agile in your technology if your pricing systems are rigid. You can't change the price dynamically if your pricing system was written 30 years ago and is very structured and requires inputs. And it can't do it dynamically. Same thing's true with, the customer experience, or in the case of an airline, you lose a bag not because you have a bad baggage handling system, but because it doesn't know where the plane is that had the bags or where the connecting flight is. All of that information could be known, but it's not, right? Because they're in silos. They're in rigid structures that have existed for years. So we're not getting by with just changing some of the technology. It's holistic in its change, and it has to be paced and funded and supported for a number of years. We're talking 2 to 4. We're not talking a decade, but we're not talking a year or two. I mean, there are big risks by moving too fast. There's a lot of hype that comes at the beginning of a technology cycle. And, we saw it in the dot-com bust. We saw it, with major proliferation when the PC came out and the distributed machines, because everybody gets excited and they, look to make big investments right away and, dominate something. That's a risk. There's a risk of moving too slowly, right? Because it's something that will mature, but not now. We'll just wait a while. And you could lose massive market share, right? I mean, you could turn into a Kodak. They owned the photograph industry, the slide industry, and they even had digital cameras, and they've disappeared, right? So, there's a point where you move too slowly. So you've got to really begin to examine industry by industry, company by company, who the leaders are, and when this technology is mature enough. But there's a lot of stuff you can do to get ready for the technology. You could modernize your legacy systems, thin out your processes, begin to train your leadership team to be more agile, more flexible, right? We're in an era now where functional excellence still matters, but cross-functional integration is really important, and cross-company and cross-ecosystem integration. So when you look at your supply chain, your suppliers, your customers, and your company. So there are lots of things you can do to begin to eliminate the hardening of the arteries before you go spend a lot of money on a lot of the new technology. But there will come a point where it will start to mature, as the internet did, and as mobility did, and as the mainframe did. So I would be a fast follower, not a laggard, and not a leader in these big companies, because the time to transform is measured in 2 to 4, 2 to 5 years, like we keep saying. What you do in your first year or two becomes pretty important. And one thing I would do in my first year or two of recognizing this is I would develop leadership training and development and develop a common language and get people ready for the change. Because, frankly, the longest pole in the tent is always going to be the organization.
As Charlie has shown us, real transformation happens when the organization evolves with the technology. Thanks for taking a walk with us today. See you next time.